Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So previously we have discussed about functions, right? Now, if we could look a little bit further at how do we pass our parameters, right? Now, passing parameters in C Sharp by default, it is by value, it's not by reference. Let's look at what this means. Okay, if I'm calling a function by passing a variable, right? What I'm actually doing is I am passing a copy of that variable to that particular function. So let me show you the code that I have here. All right. So I have okay, p equals to p plus 1. Right. So this function foo, let me just change the function name to calculate. Right. Okay. All right. So first I declare an integer q equals to 8. All right. And then I say calculate q. Calculate is the name of the function. So I'm calling function calculate and passing q, which is an integer with the value of 8 to the function calculate. All right. So let's say inside this calculate function, what I do is uh, okay, so I have a function calculate which receives an integer. Doesn't matter what we declare here. In this case, it's p, right? So let's say inside the function calculate, I do p equals to p plus 1. We know that we passed q, which is 8. And in here, p will become 8 because we passed 8, okay? So p equals p plus 1, p will now become 9. But remember, when we are passing the q here, we are basically just passing a copy of the value. So even though p equals q, because we pass q, when p changes, q remains the same. So if I run the code here, first I calculate q, in which in function calculate, I will display what is p. Before that, I add p equals p plus 1. So if I run this code, okay, you'll notice that p is actually 9 because p equals p plus 1. So p is now 9. But when we go back to the main function, we write console.writeLine q, q is still 8. Because even though we pass q, we pass it by value and not passing it by reference, right? In other words, we are just passing a copy of the value of q. Okay, we can as well pass parameters by reference because obviously it depends on what type of data that you are actually using, right? Because integer is basically is just a value type data. In this example, we can use, for example, let's say if we are using a class, we know that a class is basically a reference type. Okay, it's not value type. You can refer to my previous video regarding this. So class is basically a value type. All right. So let's say in my main function, initially I declare point q equals to new point. So we know already that this q is coming from this class here, class point. So q will contain x and y. All right. So q.x and q.y. So if I pass q in any of the function, I am basically passing it by reference. In other words, if it is being modified in some other functions, the modification will be reflected in q as well. All right. Let's copy this code and try to see. Okay, right. Then I need to declare class here. Okay, the code first. The class should be outside our class. Good. Okay. We name the function calculate q. And I need to modify the function a little bit because now this is the type is point. Okay, right? P dot x equals to p dot x plus 1. Very good. Okay, so this is what's happening here. Okay, I have modified the code for you to see. Okay, so I have public class point. So I declared a class point which contains x and y, right? Okay, in my main function, I instantiate a q with type point. Okay, point q equals to new point. Remember, we need the new keyword when we're using a class type. Okay, q.x equals to 8. So I initialize q.x. You know, inside q you have q.x and q.y. q.x equals 8, and then I passed the whole q into function calculate. So this time around, when I'm passing q into the calculate function, I am actually passing a reference to that memory location that holds the data of qx and qy. So when I do calculate q, right? So q will come here. P now equals to q. So when I modify p, you will notice that q would be affected as well, because now we are passing it by reference, because class is a reference type. So this is something that you need to note. So now q.x initially is 8. I pass it to function calculate. P equals q, right? So p.x equal p.x plus 1, which means that 8 plus 1. P.x becomes 9. You will notice that when we try to print out what is console.writeLine q.x, because p.x is now 9 and p is modifying a reference type data, so q.x will become 9 as well. Let's run this code and verify this. Okay, so you see okay, console.writeLine p.x here, writeLine q.x. Okay, so see now q.x equals to 8. Calculate q, we pass q into function calculate. So we go to function calculate. It assigns q to p. Okay, so p.x equal p.x plus 1. Console.writeLine p.x. P.x is of course now 9. But because p.x points to q, which is a reference type, when we go back to the main function, console.writeLine q.x, q.x now becomes 9 as well. Because remember, for a reference data type, it's actually just pointing to a location which holds the data. So if you change it here, q will be changed as well. All right. So that is passing by reference. What if you want to pass a value type data, but you want to force it to pass by reference. Can you do that? You can actually do that by using the ref keyword. Okay, so the ref keyword, when you are declaring your function, right, function static void calculate ref integer p, so rather than receiving the integer, the copy of the value, you are forcing your code to say that don't receive the copy of the value but rather receive the reference for it. Okay, so if we do that, then even though we are using a value type, okay, let's say I will undo everything. Okay, so this was our previous code. Sorry, let me show you. This was our previous code, and we are using integer q equals 8, calculate q. If I put here in my function ref integer p, so instead of receiving the integer, the copy of the value, I say receive it as a reference, right? So you will notice that when I'm passing the uh, parameter to the function, of course I need to use ref keyword here as well. So I'm calling function calculate, and instead of passing q, I'm passing ref q, which means that I'm passing the reference to q. Okay, so when I receive, I also receive ref integer p rather than integer p. So this will force the parameter passing into a reference type rather than value type. So in other words, if anything changes here, p equals to p plus 1, the changes will be reflected to q as well, even though by default integer is actually a value type, right? But because you use a ref keyword here and at the function declaration, you can force it to pass by reference. So if I run the code now, you will see that q is p is 9, and since we change p, we change q as well, so q is also 9. Initially, without the ref keyword, q will remain as 8 because we declare here q8, right? But with the ref keyword, whatever manipulation we do here will be reflected on q as well. Okay, all right, so I think we'll end here for this video. In the next video, I'm going to share with you some other primitive data types like string, date, time, some of the important ones. And we are going to look at exception handling as well as IO operation as well, input output operation, some basic ones, inshallah. So see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi.